Welcome to Brightly, You Radiant Being, the show that wildly recognizes, encourages, and invests in the radiance we all carry so you can shine your brightest. Each episode, we share soul-driven advice and topics to help you live more brightly in mind, body, and spirit. Through sharing our experiences, friendship, and passions, we hope to impact you to step more brightly into yourself inch by inch.
Hi, Amy.
Hey, Tracy, what is going on?
Can you believe there are 4 months left of the year?
No.
I'm sorry I'm in panic mode the past few shows, but it's just Lammas is almost over. The fall equinox is approaching.
Yeah,
Like, it's autumn almost. I love it. I love that time, but can you believe it, right? Like,
I know, because it felt like it, there's a great Disney cartoon. It's The Incredibles, and the dad from The Incredibles, actually, before he's the dad, he's on his way to his wedding. He's like, I got time. I got time. There's like a cat stuck up in a tree. I got time. He goes, saves the cat. Then somebody's robbing a bank. It's like, I got time. And all of a sudden, he doesn't have any time. Like, here we are. All of a sudden, it's like, it is Thursday. And what have we done with our life, right?
yeah.
I don't know. So, I mean,
I just
like,
I just wanted I just want everybody else to feel what I'm feeling. Sorry guys. Hope you stay tuned. It's a much better cut talk.
well, and I think even though it's like, oh my gosh, 4 months left, you and I love, like you said, we love this time of year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, there's 4 months left of this year. It's not like
I got
it's
time. We do
yeah,
as of
it's
now,
not like you're
we
just
do have time.
you do have time, and also you're not going to fall off the edge of the world
Yeah,
after
and
4 months.
let's be going back to last week. Let's be intentional with that time, right? So instead of
Yes.
panicking, it's about planning, right?
Right. And so last time when we were talking about routine and structure, it kind of got me thinking, you know, how many of us lost so much of our routine and our structure of our day because of the last year, right? So, because of the pandemic, now granted, many people are working back where they started to work, but many people are still working from home. And when you do have a big sort of break go on for your routine and structure, sometimes it's hard to get that wheel turning again and get back into that structure. And so it made me think about, after this, year of loss, like, are we grieving at all our routines, our
Mm.
structure? And also that grief can come in so many different forms, right? It can come in so many different forms, and we can grieve the death. That seems very dramatic, but there can be deaths of things, the loss of something.
Yeah.
So are you grieving anything, Tracy? Are you, or are you feeling a loss of anything right now?
Yeah, I think the loss of the structure in 2020, like a lot of people, I'll be working from home indefinitely moving forward, or as
Mhm.
long as I stay with this current employer. This is my new normal, which there's a lot of aspects of that I celebrate.
Right.
But the loss of that structure and the environment, it was a loss of people time, people friends, right? And then that just kind of changed the energy in which I feel my day and how I experience things and what's in front of me. So then now in this year, as things start to reopen and we're establishing what normal looks like and finding a new routine, I'm grieving the fact that this year is actually worse for me than last year. That I feel
Okay.
like I've lost more time and more structure because I have some new physical limitations. I At some point in the spring I hurt my back and I didn't realize I hurt my back. And everything I did to try and correct the pain I was feeling made it worse. And now we're at a point where it's
Mhm.
August, when we're recording this, and I'm looking at surgery. And then even if I get the surgery, it's 6 weeks until I'm even allowed to act a percentage of normal, right? Like, I'm looking
Mhm.
at 9 months lost of this, where I didn't figure out for at least 6 of them, how to have a new normal, how to capitalize and
Yeah.
do what I can, right? Like I got
So
really stuck in
it
what
sounds like you're grieving like the loss of some of this year already. Like you said, it wasn't as bad, but it's like you're
yeah.
also grieving the future loss.
Well, just like the opportunities potentially lost or the things that were just postponed, right? Like as far as I
Right.
know, I have more time in front of me, so trying to look forward and plan and be mindful of that, but also just being like, well, gosh, where did this year go, right? Like after a
Yeah.
year like last year, I had really hoped to hit this year hard.
Yeah.
And so just the loss of opportunity and feeling kind of stuck in where I was in 2019 still, right? Um,
Oh, yeah. I hadn't thought about it like that, but it feels like we all got stuck there,
mm, mhm.
I think, to a certain extent. And not to be like, oh yeah, I understand totally, Tracy. I'm right there with because I don't.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take anything away from what you're feeling.
And
But
yeah, so for me, all throughout 2020, I would preface everything I would say about my losses and my experience with, but I don't have it that bad, right? Like I have a job, I have my health, I have family, like there's
Mhm.
a, aside from what was happening globally to people and the losses they were experiencing, my life was okay, right? Like it was lonely and it was isolating, but it was okay. And then this year, I'm recognizing like, no, you did have some losses too, right?
Yeah,
And it's not fair to compare your losses to others,
right.
um, or the impact that it has on you or your long term goals or where and how you see yourself, right? So for
Yeah.
me, I guess I'm grieving delays right now and just trying to see because everything's still up in the air. I don't know what the future me can do. Or
Right. That's a really good way to put it, though, that you're grieving delays. Yeah.
it's
And
hard. I would
good
want
is
to
a
be
weird
more
word.
ambitious than that, right? Like, or at
Hmm.
least make a plan that I pretend I'm going to do.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you have any?
Well, you know, I think that right now I'm grieving some of the things you are. I'm grieving while I too celebrate many things about working from home. I'm grieving the loss of the people who I are not on my team and who I would run into and have wonderful conversations with, you know. And so I am grieving that as well. And so now there's one person in particular who I would always run into and we would have, conversations. And so now what we've done is we've scheduled um, every other week an intentional time where it's like this is our networking time, and that's what we do. So that was good for me. Anytime grief comes up, of course I think about I mean, I lost my dad, gosh, 25 years ago,
Oh,
25 years ago, but lost my mom in almost, while we're recording this, it's almost 2 years to the day.
and it was a
No,
loss
no,
you
it's
were in.
not. No, it's not. It was in July. It's her
Yeah,
birthday's coming up. Yeah.
yeah, but it was a loss you were anticipating for almost the entire first half of the time I knew you, right? Of our relationship.
Right.
That there,
Right. So I mean, granted, everyone, she was nearly 97 when she died, but this is like the woman was not normal. So, she was still like wowing people in her 90s. She she actually modeled, I think she was 92 at the time. She did a runway modeling gig at 92 and stole the show, I might add. But the interesting thing, and what I wanted to talk about, is that while she was still alive, and I journaled it, so I know it to be true, is that I was grieving incrementally while she was still alive. And it wasn't that I was grieving the future loss, I was grieving little losses at the time. So I grieved the loss of her energy. And then I grieved the loss of our talks we used to have all these plans. We would just like plan things. And then I grieved the loss of talking about all kinds of different things when it was almost like she just got laser focused on one thing. And then I grieved needing to just tell her, like, I can't talk about this anymore. Can we talk about something else? And then I felt so bad about doing that. And so it was these little incremental losses of who she was over a 6-month period. The act of journaling helped, but also I feel like because I was grieving these intermittent losses, when she did die, I felt like it was like, yes, I'm ready for this. Now, granted, I got to spend a lot of time with her, but so I feel like that was so weird to me and eye-opening to me, the fact that it wasn't like, oh, she died, I'm grieving.
I'm
It was
sad.
right, I'm sad. It was like, oh, we're no longer doing this thing. That is very, so like I said, it was just this loss upon loss upon loss, but with the active act of grieving those losses. Um, So, and it's not that I don't want to talk the whole episode about death, because like I said before, honestly, this has been a year of grieving, right? But also we all have many losses, and sometimes it's not the death of someone. We've talked about this in a different episode. It can be losing a friendship.
Mm.
And so I'm wondering, like, how are you feeling? Have you come to terms with any friendship lost since we last talked about that?
Um, y- it's not something I ruminate on, right? Like I entered acceptance pretty quickly for how it happened because it just kind of
Okay.
seemed, in terms of a friendship, that old saying, reason, season, or a lifetime. And it was like, oh, we talked about this friendship like it was a lifetime, but this was clearly a reason or a season, right? Like it felt complete. But I do think about it from time to time because there is that element that comes with loss of lack of closure, right? Like even though we've since have met up and attempted to reconnect once, like there was still all those things not said, or all those different, like why, like even if we did talk and agree with what happened and where we are now and things like that, there's still that the je ne sais quoi part of loss, right? Where there's just like that piece of that, like, well, why is it different? Why is it gone? Why isn't it the same? Why did it have to
So
die?
I have to ask this. And I can't believe I didn't put this in any like outline or anything. The fact that we do need closure as human beings. What is that? Is it because we need a reason? Is it because why do we need the closure?
Is that rhetorical? Is that to the
I
universe?
don't
Is that to
know.
me?
I'm trying to because I'm thinking about myself, and there are certain things that I like never got closure on. And it's sort of like you, where it's like I don't ruminate on them, but every once in a while it'll just like, oh, hey, 2 a.m. pop up. And I'm like, yeah.
Oh, no, I mean, there'll be times, especially now when I'm trying to make new friends and like gearing myself up to introduce myself to people or reach out online or do other things where I'm like, well, that friendship ended because you're a terrible person, right? Like you're a crap friend and that's why
Oh,
it ended. And then I have to remind myself, like, no, you have lots of great friends right now. You are not a crap person, right? Like it ended, it didn't work out, it's okay. And so I think, especially when it comes to other people, right? Because we have an idea of ourselves, but then we also have other people's perceptions of ourselves and different ways that we weight both of those, and sometimes it's really incongruent, right? Or our experiences, or whether we're being gaslit. So like a lot of times in romantic relationships, someone will be like, I know you cheated on me, just tell me, I need that closure. Another person will be like, no, I never did. And you both know you're lying, right? Like it's just, but you just need them to say, and they'll never say. And so it's one of those things where it just still kind of, I don't know, like there is that reason, or we think maybe it'll bring comfort, or it'll
Yeah.
just make it all make sense, right?
And here's the thing, because I feel like I'm just going to hit on that one thing you just said. We think it'll bring comfort. And actually, in my history, I would feel like when I get the closure that I thought I needed or the reason, it wasn't comforting. It was not comforting. And I should have just kept telling myself my own story about it. In fact, I think we all should just make up our own lovely story. Not I was a crap friend, but like, well, the typhoon came and our worlds were split into, and now they're on the other side of the world and there's no way to communicate. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if a closure is a way of assigning accountability too, right?
Ooh,
Like whether it's a death or a loss or a missed opportunity or you weren't picked for something.
I,
A lot of times
yeah.
closure is a way to be like, that wasn't my fault, right? Like this is the reason why it happened. It's not on me. I
Mm-hmm.
can look at it externally now and
Mm-hmm.
be okay with it being gone or like
That it wasn't
or
my
bash it with
fault.
my friends or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I
And
don't
yet, yeah, I feel like if we could simply just look at something and instead of assigning blame or accountability, to be able to say it wasn't the right time for that, or it just wasn't, I know that we say,
or
well, it wasn't meant to be.
yeah, I mean, when the dissolution of my friendship occurred, it I didn't feel a loss after it was gone, and so that helped me with through that acceptance stage of grief. If we look at that standard model, where I definitely had now holes in my time, and I still think of the person and think of them fondly,
Mm-hmm.
but it just felt like a natural ending, as abrupt and sudden and questionable as it was. It was
Mm-hmm.
also like, oh, this is done, right?
Yeah.
But then like let's say something would happen to her, right? Or positive or negative. I'm not a part of that, right? Or like I'm still there's going to be future losses, right? Or you
Yeah.
hear them or you see them or things like that. So there's still like all these little tiny losses because when it's not a death, there you continue to miss out on things. So
Right. Right. And people don't always get closure at with a death either. And so I will say in my circumstance, um, with both of my parents, I knew it was going to happen. It was not something sudden or unexpected. And so there is something to be said for that, because you get to say things to the other person that maybe you wouldn't have said to them.
well, and I feel like the grief that comes with the loss of a relationship, whether through death or a breakup,
Mhm.
moving apart, or something like that, you're, it's the relationship that's lost. It's the individual person that's lost, and then there's also who you were as a part of that that's lost.
That I think is something that we rarely look at or want to look at, because you're right, because I wonder if that's actually what we're grieving.
I when you talked about what you went through with your mom, and thank you for sharing that, it reminded me of what I've been going through as an adult with parents and grandparents whose faculties and health are changing, and
Mhm.
how that has pushed me into different areas of my lifespan a little bit earlier than I thought I'd be, right? Like
Right.
it moves you from daughter who can depend on dad, right? Daughter who has a mom that she goes to advice, to more of a peer, and then at some point a caretaker.
Yes.
And so you have this loss of roles, and more so that not only do you take on greater burdens, and so you have a loss of freedom or time or money or things like that, or there's just
Mhm.
stuff you have to deal with that you didn't have to before, and just grieving missing how it was, but like you're also losing that freedom to be a child, that freedom to not be the
Mhm.
accountable party, to not be responsible. And
Right.
that sucks. That's a loss for me, right? Like, and
Yeah.
it never happens when you want it to happen, right? And then you also have to watch that person and grieve for them and the loss of who they were in the relationship you had together, but then also what
Mhm.
they lose outside of you. So it's just there's so many layers to the grief,
There
right? Whether you
are.
know it's
And
coming or not.
Yeah. Oh, honestly, it's true. And I didn't even write anything about, the oh, what is it called? The different stages
Five
of
stages
grief,
of grief.
right? Which actually were written about dying and not grieving, apparently, to begin with. Apparently, the five stages of
It's
grieving
grieving the
was
own loss of your own life.
of
Yeah.
your own life, right?
For cancer
Um,
patients and things like that, that
yes.
knew the end is coming.
Yes. And so the thing that, and I think you and I have talked about this before on the show, is that it is not a linear line. It is not this stage and then this stage and then this stage. It
You
is
could have
this
three at
stage.
once.
You could have three at once. You could move, you could hop, you could just like hop
You
right
go
over this
back.
one, then you're going to go back. It is, talk about a scribble, right?
Yeah.
Or a loop de loop. And sometimes there's even times when you think you've gone like you're like, I'm good, I'm golden, like I have closure, I've accepted it, everything. And then all of a sudden I this was just for an example, we were all the kids and I were going through something and we found this card still in the envelope, right? The envelope was still sealed and it was to Joey, my middle child, and it was in my dad's handwriting. And I'm like, I don't know why this wasn't opened. And he opened it and it was a Christmas card from my dad and there was a $20 bill in there. And we all just burst into tears because it was like, it just brought it home that, oh my gosh, like we were, it was sort of happy tears, but also sad tears as well. Like he'll
Because it
never
brings
be
up what you didn't grieve, what wasn't completely
exactly
released and let go,
it,
or
maybe, but also it was like a gift from him from right now in a way too. So sometimes I'm still surprised by
but
grief.
it's little things like that. Like I've talked about this on the show before, I believe, but I used to have this trunk, a literal trunk I would drag with me every time my
Yes.
lease was up. I moved and I dragged it
Yes.
and dragged it and dragged it. And finally, one year I sat outside a bonfire and I went through it and I took pictures of the stuff that mattered and then burned it, like released it to the world. But my favorite thing to find was that even at 10 years old, I was not cashing my great grandparents' checks for $5 for birthdays and Christmas. And so to find those checks in the cards and like you said, it's like a gift all over again, and
Yeah.
seeing them, and it brings them back to life in a sense. And
Yeah. You
um
didn't cash them then though, right?
I'd be impressed if I could have. No, I took pictures of them and then they were added to the fire. But it was one of those things where even though as a kid when they passed and I grieved them then, and I didn't feel a hole in my life because they were significantly older than me. Like I
Right.
wasn't even I was seeing them maybe once a year, right? Like
Hmm.
just a couple of times here or there, quick visits. Didn't have a ton in common. They weren't huge features in my life, but it was like a little grief all over again. Like,
Yeah.
oh, they didn't get to see my first apartment. They didn't get to
Right.
see, they don't know I went and graduated from college. They'll never meet my future children, right? Like there's
Okay.
all sorts of new losses that I kind of have to come to terms with when I think about them.
Yes. Now, whether this is considered magical thinking or not, I never go to that point because
Okay.
I always am like, of course they know that I did this. Of course they were there when this child graduated. Of course they saw this happen. Of course they're celebrating with me on this. Like, I don't know why. And I've been like that for a very long time through all my different iterations of belief systems. But so when somebody says, oh, they didn't get to see me do this, I'm always like, yeah, they did. They were right there with you.
In terms of magical thinking, which that's Joan Didion, what's her name?
Gideon.
Didion.
Hmm.
Wrote a book on that after a tremendous year of losing her husband and her daughter. But I had that, so around, I want to say late middle school, so like 12, 13-ish, we had a lot of losses in our life. Boom, boom, boom. And then again, just a couple years later, or a few years later when I was 21. And the people who passed, where I experienced them the most was my grandmother's trailer. which was still very 1970s decorated, but every room was kind of a theme, right? So her bedroom was very elaborate and all in white. The living room had green shag carpet. There was a kid room, and then there was a room all blue shag carpet, blue curtains, blue, comforter, blue everything. So there were like these very, and depending on your age in the family during different events, that determined what room you got to hang out in, right? Like whether you were in the little kid room with the Barbies or whether you were in the blue room with the movies, right? And they were also known for having a TV and all the latest tech in every room, and recording every movie on HBO. So like all these blank tapes, you could watch whatever movie you wanted, their own blockbuster. So when they passed, I would picture them in the trailer in heaven, and they'd go to the kid room to watch the kids on that TV. They'd go to the blue room to watch the older girls on that TV. They'd in the living room, they could see this stuff. And so I just pictured like that environment that I knew them the best in, like that's now their heaven personality and how they
I
would
love it so much.
right. And then I was also, but like the really personal, intimate stuff, it's a fuzzy screen. They can't see that. They're not there. Right.
Right.
So much
Right.
stuff I would want them to be. I want them to be seen. But like
Yeah.
the trailer, even like when they sold the trailer just prior, when my grandmother, prior to her death, she sold the trailer and moved into a townhome, like I clearly, after she died, needed to grieve the loss of that family institution of where everything up until 20 years of my life took place, right? Like I
Yes.
lost that space too. And so in that magical thinking, like after
Mhm.
people pass, like it just kept growing and growing and encompassing the total
Yeah.
loss, right?
Yeah.
It's also that ended how we did Christmas Eves as an extended family, right? She was the
Mhm.
matriarch, and now we have like three matriarchs competing and trying to
Right.
establish their own traditions for their families, right?
Right.
So it sprung me into an adulthood in a way, but then that magical thinking, I got to stay a kid and stay
Yeah.
involved with them in that way.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up the whole idea of that place and grieving that place and what it meant, because we had a place in for my side of the family. It was the holiday house, right? And it used to be my mom's, like it was my mom's. And then my sister took that house over, and it was still the holiday house. Like, and the kids would call it that. And then my sister ended up selling the house. And I remember my kids were like, she can't sell, that's the holiday house. It's like,
Right.
well, no, she actually can sell the house. It's okay. But I understood. It's not like I discounted their grief. It was like absolutely so many cool things happened there. But yes, there was a grief of that. When after I left so when I first started working for the library, I worked in a community
Physical life.
library, a
Yep.
physical library. I worked there for 15 years. Um, Many of those years with the same people, or many of the same people, the 15 years. Not only the same people that I worked with, but the same patrons. I saw patrons grow up, right?
Yeah.
From babies to middle schoolers. And so when you work in a small community library and the staff is small, you're out at the service desk a lot and you develop relationships with the patrons and all the kids who come in. So I then got a promotion and was going to be a supervisor, a co-supervisor at a very large library with many staff. And I got there and I started working, and something was just off. And it was like I was sad and I didn't understand it until finally one day I was like, I'm grieving. I'm grieving not only the loss of the people I used to work with and my friends, I'm grieving the intimate patron interactions that I had and relationships, connections that I had to these patrons in this community.
And
Um,
prior to leaving that, you were probably so focused on one, the excitement of getting something you worked hard for and applied for and interviewed
Yeah.
for and received. And then that hustle and bustle of the transition of starting something new and giving stuff
Yeah.
over that you don't even take time. Like you say your goodbyes and then, you think of like, oh, I'm going to miss you, but I'll still see you. But then once it calms down and that dust settles of the transition of a
Yeah.
change, it can really hit you. So
It was probably 4 months later that finally it was like, oh, this is what's happening to me.
yeah, I'm hearing and seeing a lot of that on TikTok of students that didn't get graduation, students that didn't get prom. And I didn't have a whole lot of empathy at the time for high schoolers because I avoided those things. I didn't want to go, right? My mom made me graduate and I skipped prom and I didn't feel a loss like they did, but they lost something they wanted. But as I
Mhm.
start to see these college students, the freshmen, their freshman year, their sophomore year, and now potentially going into their junior year of college completely at home, asynchronous and is online or bouncing back and forth. And
Yeah.
what a loss of a complete chunk of their time, a certain experience you're supposed to have,
Yeah.
friendships you could have made, just the whole learning experience, and just like so many people had so many losses. Like, are they even being allowed to grieve that? And what does that new normal look for them? Like, what is a senior year for them on campus going to be, assuming in a year they get to go back full, and it's normal.
Right. Right. And do they even understand? Like, do they
Yeah, right
know
now
that they're
they're mad.
grieving?
They're frustrated because schools are clearly making this up on the fly. And how can you have a continuity of operations plan for the entire world telling you to stay home, right? Like nobody
Right.
was ready for this. Very few
No.
people had any idea that, or, believe this
Mhm.
could happen. And so, a lot of them are just angry, right? They're still having to pay it. They're confused. They don't know what's
Right.
going on. But like, at what point does that grief come in? And what happens if they don't allow themselves to
Well,
grieve it? They
that's
don't
just it.
recognize it as grief.
Right. So if you don't allow or like you said, recognize it as grief. So if you don't acknowledge the grief and then allow yourself that that space to actually grieve, you can't just go, oh, I'm grieving, and then tra la la walk on with your day. I mean, yes, acknowledging it is one step, but you actually have to allow it then, because otherwise, you know, I just feel like it can manifest in your life in many different ways where all of a sudden you're just like, uh, you snap right at work or something. And then all of a sudden you don't have a job anymore because you've just like quit. And really you just needed to grieve.
Yeah, or addiction in any forms, whether it's electronic, people, food, drugs, alcohol. Like, it's so many of those people are masking feelings and emotions that they just don't
Mhm,
want to experience, whether it's
mhm,
grief or not. But oftentimes it is, right? Like, because grief has
mhm.
so many emotions associated with it. It's not just feeling sad.
Yeah. And sometimes even if we think we're grieving, we're allowing it, it becomes too much for us on our own. And then we do try to mask it with these different addictions,
So
right?
for me recently, I talked a few episodes back that I felt like I had this opportunity come up and it was meant for me. And it was going to be a temporary thing, but it was going to be a big change and I was excited about it. And then this week, or the week of recording, it became apparent it was most likely not going to happen, right? There were just kind of
Mhm.
signs like it was just taking too long to hear back. And so I was preparing myself to grieve it, right? And to be upset at the loss. And then when the loss was actually presented to me, I realized I had relief. And so
Okay.
when I looked back
Yeah.
at my week, I'd been pretty hard on myself all week because it was like, you were going to have a really quick transition time and you did nothing to prepare. You actually procrastinated and got further behind then you you didn't even just do what you absolutely wanted to do for this week. And so when I looked at it, it was like I was pre-grieving a loss of leaving my team. I didn't realize it. I was digging my heels in. I wasn't ready to leave.
Yes, you
I've talked about
were.
it. I love my boss. I like what I do. And this just
Yeah.
seemed like an opportunity to grab and get temporary experience and come back. And when I look back on the past 2 weeks of like preparing for it, I was like, you clearly didn't want that. Like I was procrastinating because I wasn't allowing like any type of preparation. I would have had to deal with the grief of the loss of like, even though I was trying to be excited for the new, I wasn't allowing myself to be like, you're losing a great relationship with your boss, you're losing the opportunities and the work that you do now that you
Yeah.
love. like as soon as he started talking about temporarily replacing me is when I started to procrastinate and shut down. And I was jealous. I was like, no, like,
Yeah,
no, you're going to struggle without me and come to me for help. Like,
exactly.
and so
So you were
now I
pre-grieving.
was
That's, yeah.
pre-grieving, and it wasn't until I lost what I thought I would grieve for that I was like, "Oh, you need to hold on tighter to what you have, right? Like you
Yeah.
like this a lot more than you think, right? Or than I was
Yeah.
aware of. I definitely didn't want to lose it, or I didn't. My rational brain was telling me, "You're not losing it. You're just stepping away for a minute, right?" But like any transition like that changes. It changes the relationships I have. It changes the work I do. It changes what I could potentially come. I mean, nothing is guaranteed. Like a lot could happen in a year had I been gone. So yeah, it was
Right.
really weird. I was getting ready to grieve a loss all week, and then I didn't even realize that I was avoiding grieving a loss I didn't realize I was going to have if I got the good thing. That makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I'm just glad that you could be like, oh, this is what was
Yeah,
happening.
I was like, why? Like, because I wasn't stressed about it either. So, like, part of me wants to be like, oh, intuitively, you knew you weren't going to get it. So, why stress out? No, no. Like, I was like, Tracy, why aren't you rushing? Like, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you making lists? Why aren't you updating your project management schedules and plans and like walking him through where we're at things?
Yeah.
And to him, I was just like, I don't want to waste any energy till we know, man. And I was like, no, no. Like, do a little bit more self-awareness work. You don't want to leave.
So interesting. I, I, I want to go back to something that you said about the trailer because I love that you were
Oh
thinking
yeah.
about your grandma like being in this room and watching this age kids on the TV and then going to this room and seeing the younger kids on this TV and just sort of like having that picture in your head of basically what she would be doing in heaven at that time, right?
Clearly just only concerned with her granddaughters.
Well, right, right. And that makes sense. How old were you again?
When she passed, I was 21, but when all like my first instances with death with her husband and my uncle and
Yes.
everybody I associated with that house, I was 13. And
Okay.
then she was
Okay.
kind of like the capstone of it and had just sold her house
Yes.
prior to that. So
Yeah. And then I love it that even though she sold her house, like, no, she's in
that's
this
her house.
place.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
no, she's not in the
exactly.
townhouse. No,
Yeah.
no.
So I did not have that foresight for myself to do that. And so even though I felt after my mom died, like I was pretty well, it felt like, okay, this seems okay. But I had actually started, apparently I wasn't as okay as I thought I was. Surprise. Spoiler alert.
You were okay with the idea of loss, but once she was taken, you were like, no, not what I wanted. No.
Well, and really what happens is after a while you're like, oh wait, this is permanent and now I never get to do this thing. But so a spiritual mentor actually said this to me and it helped so much and it just reminds me of what you said about the trailer and your grandma. And that he said instead of remembering the past with them, think of what they are or could be doing now. So, like, whether it's a loss of friendship and they're still alive, and you're thinking they're probably having fun doing this thing, or if it's the loss, of a loved one, a death of someone. The minute he said that to me, I was like, it was like 100% I could see her at this point in time. Of course, she was younger. She would be younger, because I think she'd want to be younger and more able bodied and just having fun and like laughing
You're
with her
picturing her spirit,
friends.
not her
Yes,
physical form. Yeah.
right. I did. Right. Exactly. Her spirit and her energy and having this glorious time right now. And it was like this weight lifted. And so I feel like, can you sort of hold that? Can you hold maybe if you still have grief for this person, can you hold that grief and the actual belief in their present happiness? I don't know.
I think the challenge with that comes in order to do that, you have to be at the acceptance stage of grief. And I think a lot of times when people die of old age, or you
Mm-hmm.
have, like you shared, you have the time to say your piece and they can say their
Mm-hmm.
goodbyes and stuff, and it makes the acceptance easier. Um, I definitely, I have a friend who passed really young, and immediately, just within months of having a baby and within a year or two of getting married, and just whole life ahead of her.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of people when she passed were so concerned with everybody she left behind, as was I. Like, huge
Mm-hmm.
loss in their life, huge loss in my life. And I mean, I saw her maybe once a year. I continue to grieve what she lost, that future that she didn't have. And so
Mm-hmm.
I like your idea of trying to picture her still having that, instead of it still makes me sad, right? Like, I've
Right.
come to terms, it's been a few years now since she's been gone, and I do, there different people, we all have different symbols that we see that make us think of her, different memories or
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And so that brings warmth to my heart, or to think that she's still with people or watching people that way. But then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when it does hit me, or like a certain anniversaries or stuff like that, I still just, it's such a huge loss for her, right? Like, we all had a huge loss, but she lost all of us. And so I
Mm-hmm.
love your idea, because I think that'll move me away from the anger piece of it,
Yeah.
or the hurt piece of it. Because I've had some friends who have had miscarriages, right? A lot of people don't talk about those a lot, or even, like, oftentimes they didn't even tell people they were pregnant yet. And so how do you tell people you then lost a child? And
Mm-hmm.
as you know, one of our listeners, one of my friends, had just a tremendous amount of loss this year. Some expected, some not. Doesn't make it any
Mm-hmm.
easier. But throughout the experiences of loss that I've had of some really young people, and um, just like I said, opportunities lost for them, for us. My new mantra became "fuck loss." It became allowing people to sit in the anger of it, versus immediately going to, oh, they're in a better place, right? Like, it
Oh,
all
and
depends on where. Yeah.
in no way am I saying, no, no,
Oh, and
think
I'm
of
not saying
them
you
in
are.
this better place. No, because you have to, like you said, you have to be it. And that is absolutely, you should be, you should have all those feelings. But once it gets to a certain point, I think that then to think of them as happy
Well,
now
I think
could
that's
help
the
with
thing.
acceptance.
Yeah, that's the thing with grief, where if you don't want it to be showing up in known and unknown ways in your life, you have to push yourself through it. It has to be, it's about self-actualization in grief. It doesn't just happen to you magically one day, you're okay with it. It's a process and a journey, and all the stages they talk about are true, and then probably 10 additional ones that aren't
Right.
in there, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when it comes to people, I like that kind of imagery. I think the type of grief that's harder for me in life, and that I see people not deal with, or not deal with constructively, or receive support on, are those little losses, of not getting the job you want, getting fired from a job. That's so hard, and especially the older you are, and the less likely you feel
Well,
you are to be re-employed, right?
right. And then you've got the whole, not only do you have grief, but you have shame. And
Yes.
neither one of those things are
And
things that you
purpose,
want to
like,
look at,
yeah, you're grieving
right?
the loss of your purpose in
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
But then even some people too, I grew up knowing a family that lost their house to a tornado, and I can't even begin to empathize with what that feels like for any of them, for the parents, for the kids when they were kids, and then
Mhm.
how that impacts how they relate to their material belongings in their home and storms today.
Hey, yeah. My mom lost a house to fire.
Yeah.
So,
And
and that was at a point, in fact, when she lost the house to fire, she was a public speaker. This was when she was 60 and very far along in her career as a public speaker before computers.
mm,
Okay. So before computers, before cell phones, everything was on what was called a Rolodex. So it was this round thing that she had on her desk. It had all these index cards that
And
fit
no
into this
backup.
thing. And that's where all of her contacts were.
Oh,
So she literally lost her house and her business.
wow.
She lost her business. And so the grieving process for her with that was immense. Did she build it back up again? Yes, but it took a lot for her to actually do that. And sorry, but you talking about the tornado, because I hadn't thought, I just
I
had
mean,
forgotten about that.
well, or even just I know people who have lost wedding rings or jewelry that mean a lot to them, or something somebody passed down to them, or a watch that has been in the family for generations, and then somehow it's either stolen or lost or gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I try not to assign any weight to any material belongings. Knock on wood, if this entire place were to collapse, I'm of the mindset, for me, based on the boundaries I've implemented in my own brain from seeing other people's losses, that it's, if it can be replaced with money, it's an inconvenience, not a loss.
Yeah.
But I love my house, and it's a goal of mine to shepherd it to 100 years, right? Like it's almost there. I want to be the one that gets it to 100 years, knock on wood. I just had to have a very adult conversation about homeowners insurance with my policy guy, where we had to talk about what would happen if it was a total loss, right? Which 3% of all insured people go through. And like, what would I want to replace, and how would I want to rebuild? And it made me sad, and I hadn't even lost anything yet, right? Like I was like, wow, like your belongings in the house, but like the prospect of like the energy and what this represents, and it's the first home I have ever had. And like he even asked, like, is that your forever home? And I was like, well, I don't know, right? Like
Right.
I don't want to like stop future opportunities by coming in by being like, this is my home, but I'm also like, this is mine, and it's gonna last forever, and you're gonna stop talking about things. Like, ask of God that could happen. Like, we're getting into 100, okay?
Yeah.
And so, and the one hand, I want to make sure I'm prepared financially, but I realized I have to prepare myself mentally for someday moving, right? Or even just the
Yeah.
prospect of, talked in the past. I have great neighbors on both sides of me, and they're neighbor relationships. We're not like best friends. We don't celebrate holidays together, but like, what if they move? Like, that would be change, and that would be grief. And like, I could still stay in contact with them, but like grieving
Mm-hmm.
whatever weird interactions, or like what's become our neighborly thing, like that's
Yeah.
a loss to think about.
Yeah.
And so it's just, so many times you don't think a loss of something would cause you to grieve. And like now, as I kind of like assess what's in my life that I could lose, I'm like, oh God, there's a lot more than you thought. Like,
Right.
and
Oh my gosh, there is. This actually just brought it up to me. I had forgotten about it, and this just brought it up to me again. When I switched phones and we had to switch phone numbers, and I wasn't prepared for this, I didn't realize it would happen. I lost all the texts that I had. And so all the texts from my kids, that was the main thing. Like, they were just gone, and there was
yeah,
no way to retrieve them. And that was really hard for a long time. And then all of a sudden it was like, it's okay now,
yeah.
because I have new texts now.
When my friend passed, it was a stage in my life where I never deleted a text message. And
Yeah.
so I went through and I screen capped the conversations, and just had like these little memories of, we had a lot of interactions in like this 3 or 4 year period. And it was really nice to get to have that, because I was somebody who, although I wasn't a huge part of her life, she had a big impact on mine. And so I was feeling a loss, but also like weighing my loss to others, right? Like, I didn't grow up with her, I wasn't married to her, right? But like, she's such
We
a,
do that.
right,
Yeah.
we do that.
Hmm.
And getting to see those messages is like, no, I was a part of her life, and I did matter.
Yeah.
And now I revisit that,
Yeah.
because we think like our memories, that like they don't serve us for long, right? And so that's where technology is great, because I can take pictures of things, I can back up photos, I can have backups of backups on different servers, right? Like, I have a little bit more security. Like, I think like thinking of losing everything in my home, I have a complete inventory in Excel of my belongings. Like I can replace every book. I know every book I own, right? Like I don't have to be like, oh God, like what of that losing things you didn't even realize you had, or
Right.
stuff like that. Um, one other thing that before we shift to the universe, I think in addition to, materials, material goods, people, experiences, we've talked about that time. I think one thing people don't talk about is the grieving, the stuff they didn't do, right? Like as we age, I think
Mhm.
we shared this in a prior one. You've just accepted you'll never surf, right? Like you're never going to be a surfer.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm okay with that. But
yeah,
you
for
know
me,
what? You know what does come up every once in a great while is the fact that at one point in my life, I thought I was going to be a ballerina. And while I did take ballet and I did take toe for a limited period of time, it was quite apparent that I was earthbound
hmm,
and and a farm girl and not really a ballerina of ballerina stock.
yeah.
And I did grieve that for a while. I'm okay with that now, but for a while there it was like, well, who am I if that's like if I'm not Tiny Dancer, right?
And there's so many things that you don't have to do when you're young, right? Like you can have a
Yeah,
college experience,
right.
you can change jobs and stuff. But one thing that I've been grieving a lot lately is I will never have had that first love as a teenager, right? Like I didn't
Okay.
there's certain experiences I just didn't have, and
Hmm.
they were choices at the time. But like now looking back as like I consider what type of relationship I want moving forward, like I have to accept the fact I'll never be married for 75 years, right? Like some huge feats have to happen in the healthcare industry in addition to my love life for that to happen, right? So there's certain things you don't realize until it's gone, which is why like my routine episode and our dreams and goals episodes, it's about like making the most of the time you have and like
Hmm.
making choices so that you don't have to grieve losses later when you're like, oh, I didn't even realize that I lost that opportunity.
Right.
And
Right.
sometimes that stuff is taken from us when, I just look at my grandpa, he was a Marine, he was really physical. He got Parkinson's
Yeah.
and he had to grieve the loss of his mental faculties, his physical faculties much earlier in life than he
Yeah.
should have had to, right? And
Hmm.
so then that approached how I look at my own health and how much time I have left a little differently too.
Yeah.
And kind of pre-grieve a potential, again, I'm not saying I'm sit in grief, but like just kind of think about as I make my choices in life, like these things could happen. And by being
Right.
self-aware of them now and not being surprised with them later, I'm hoping I'll get through the grief faster, right? And get to that
Hmm.
piece that allows me on the next step of my journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's important. I think that also it's okay if you don't get through your grief fast or
Yeah,
fast enough,
it's okay.
right? Yeah, it is okay. Um yeah, so, w- I had a very hard time with the universe today for this episode. The universe and I argued several times
Well,
and
it gave you the cards for our last episode that I
which
also
is so
have as
funny because
well.
it wasn't until we were going through it that I was like, wait, you got the 10 of swords and 7 of pentacles? That's what I got for grief. And then I went, no, universe. And then my husband just said, you just need to walk away. You need to get up and walk away, which I did. And I came back and I got the Chariot. So when I first saw this, I was like, no, that's not the right card either. But then I talked to myself and said, no, you have to accept this. And what can you find about this? So the Chariot is basically this person in a chariot with two sphinxes that are supposedly, they are the what is driving the chariot or the force behind the chariot. The chariot driver has no reins, so it's just his will that is making the sphinxes go where he wants them to go. um he is basically like this is a it is a major arcana card. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to look it up. And what's some things that they talk about with this card. And basically, the first thing that popped out was choosing courage over fear. And something that I want people to remember is that the core word of courage, core, means heart. So I think if you choose to choose courage is also to be sort of wholehearted, right? Which you need to be in order to acknowledge and then allow grief, right? The driver is facing uncertainty in a way, because here's these two sphinxes and there's no reins. And so anything could happen at any time, but he still is choosing where to go. So you have a little tiny bit of control over this.
I love it takes courage to grieve.
It does take courage to grieve. It does. My dad used to always say, be brave and love each other. And I just love that. But also on this card, and I am not the person who saw this, I follow someone who does tarot. There's these epilots. I don't know if you can see them. So it's the little shoulder pads. We'll call them shoulder pads. And if you look closely, some people have said they're the phases of the moon. I don't see that. I see what this other person talks about. It's actually the drama masks. So it's comedy and tragedy. And basically, that's life, right? So this is life. So instead of trying to avoid grieving or avoid any feelings, bad feelings around this, understand that life is this whole thing, right? It is comedy and tragedy. And you do have to be courageous to feel the things that you're going to feel in your life.
What a great spin on that card, because I wasn't sure where grief was gonna go. I picked a card myself and I got the Three of Swords, which is a little too on the nose for like being sad about
Three of Swords is basically heartbreak.
It's heartbreak. But the Chariot to me is also, it's about movement, right? You don't want to stay stagnant in life. And I think if you're not allowing yourself to grieve, and especially if you're actively avoiding it, you're grounding, you're rooting yourself where you are.
Right. And so if you are allowing yourself to grieve, you are moving through it. You might be moving back and forth, but you are moving through it. And it is a fact of life, right? So then I think,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to jump ahead. I was going to say this also kind of relates to what we're going to talk about next week.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's a perfect segue into like what better topic of grief than to segue into harvesting, right? So next time the wheel of the year is turning, we know this. And just like life and comedy and tragedy, the wheel of the year turns. And what's happening now is that days are getting a little bit shorter, nights are getting a little bit longer, and there is actually going to be a time of balance where it's the day and night are the same amount of time. So it's a time of reflection, of balance, and we're going to be talking all about Mabon, and also it's fall, y'all. So that's going to be fun.
Well, if this episode spoke to your soul, please share it with a friend. And if you have time, give us some love on your preferred platform with a rate, review, and subscribe. You can also reach out to us via Instagram and YouTube under The Brightly Podcast, or via email at brightlypodcast@gmail.com.
And we hope, even if you are in the middle of grieving something, that you still have a bright and beautiful day. Bye.